Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the last day of Relativity Fest. My name is Apoorv Agarwal, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of TextIQ. My co-founder, Omar, will be joining us in a few minutes. He'll invite 3 customers who'll share how they've been benefiting from the use of our technology. But before that, let me tell you a bit more about the origin and the key differentiator of our technology. Using AI to take control of unstructured data. I got my PhD in computer science from Columbia University and specialized in natural language processing and machine learning. This slide shows an output from the machine learning models we built over several years of research. We built machines that could go through unstructured data, something as unstructured as a 19th century British novel like Jane Austen's Emma. The machine could read the novel, extract the characters from the story. That's easy, but based on the kind of language characters used, their social network, it could infer the roles of characters in the story along with the relationships with other characters. We then applied the same technology to find fraud, code words, and other types of sensitive information in corporate unstructured data. Here's an example of an email. It's an email from Mike to Sarah. The subject is lunch. And it says, I had lunch with John. He liked his Reuben sandwich today. You should get it ASAP. There is absolutely nothing sensitive about this email. Until you figure out that, hey, out of hundreds of Johns at the organization, this is John Powell, whose role is that of a note taker for a board member, meaning John has access to non-public material information. John is friends with Mike, and Reuben sandwich is a code word for a stock they're trading on. Suddenly, this becomes the most sensitive document. Finding sensitive information goes far beyond the 4 corners of the document. It requires understanding people, their roles, and their relationships. It takes all of this context, both social and linguistic, to find sensitive needles in a haystack. For this reason, being able to build what we call a social-linguistic hypergraph is the key differentiator of our technology. We convert the haystack of unstructured data into this hypergraph representation and then apply AI to find sensitive information. These are some of the technical paradigms we've been using in our innovation: unsupervised machine learning, social network analysis, graphical modeling, natural language processing, and deep learning. With that, I'd love to turn it over to my co-founder, who's here with 3 customers to tell you more about the use cases and the technology. Over to you, Omar.
Thanks, Apoorv. Hi, everyone. I'm Omar Haroon, co-founder and COO of TextIQ. Now that Apoorv covered the fundamental concepts behind our technology, I want to examine 2 specific applications of our AI: privilege review and data breach response. We'll address privilege review first. As many of the e-discovery professionals in the audience can attest to, the privilege review process presents some intractable challenges, particularly at a time when enterprise data is growing exponentially. I'm now going to introduce someone who, given his background and experience, can speak to the challenges of privilege review with a lot more nuance. Scott Rintz is the lead attorney of data analytics and e-discovery at Cravath, Swaine & Moore. At Cravath, Scott advises clients on the use of AI in litigation, and he has represented numerous companies and financial institutions in litigation, regulatory matters, and internal investigations. In 2020, Cravath was the recipient of the New York Law Journal's Innovation Award for its use of AI for the identification of privileged information. Scott, thank you for joining us today. You've been at the forefront of using AI in litigation and document review. What, in your opinion, makes privilege review especially challenging, and why have pre-existing approaches failed to solve this problem?
Thank you, Omar. It's really a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the invitation and to Relativity. As you said, privilege review is very difficult, one of the most difficult tasks in a document review project. What makes privilege review so hard? I think it's worth unpacking that a little bit. So the first thing that makes it hard are that the markers of privilege can be very subtle. Oftentimes, the privileged information comes in the form of a stray reference in an email to something that Joe told me, and it turns out that Joe is an attorney, and what he told you was advice. or perhaps it's in a 45-slide PowerPoint presentation, and it's a line that's a summary of a privileged investigation or advice of counsel. So these can be very difficult to spot, whether for human or for a machine. The second thing that makes privilege review hard is that you don't know what you don't know. Your client maybe have a great understanding of who current counsel is and outside counsel, but what they may not know is 5 years ago, the outside counsel that advised on a particular matter, or a lawyer who's no longer with the company, or a long forgotten privileged investigation. Until you go through the documents, it's impossible to know everything that might be privileged that's contained in those documents. The third thing that makes privilege review difficult is that the legal judgments can be very tricky. An email going to a mix of attorneys and non-attorneys has aspects of legal and non-legal advice and questions baked into it. Untangling all of that and figuring out what's privileged and what's not is no easy feat. And then the final thing is that consistency is critical. With all of these difficulties, and it's not good enough to be right 90% of the time. As we all know, there's a lot of overlapping and duplicative information in these data sets. And if you get it right 9 times out of 10, but that 10th time contains the same information, it's as good as not having gotten it right at all. So that makes privilege review extremely hard. Question is, can technology help? And we have reason to think it could, because technology and technology-assisted review has been extremely helpful in the domain of relevance review and responsiveness review. And in fact, studies show that TAR is at least as accurate as linear review when it comes to responsiveness. So can we say the same for privilege? Well, interestingly enough, TAR really hasn't been used widely for privilege. And I think the conventional wisdom is that there's something inherent about the privilege review process, or the questions that are raised by privilege, that because it's a legal question, that in some ways it's not appropriate for a technology-assisted review. I'd like to challenge that conventional wisdom. I think that many of the same factors I went through about what makes privilege review hard are present when it comes to reviewing for relevance or responsiveness. The markers can be very subtle, can be just the difference of the inclusion of a particular party or in a particular date range that might make something relevant. You don't know what you don't know. There will always be a surprise in a document review about the issues that come up and questions that come up. And until you get in there, you don't know what those questions are going to be. The legal judgments can be tricky. These RFPs that we're dealing with, many times there are dozens or even hundreds of different requests, and figuring out the subtle distinctions between them is no easy feat. And just like privilege review, consistency, it is important. But I would suggest that the most important difference between what makes privilege review more challenging than relevance review is not the inherent nature of the inquiry, but the risk tolerance. So when it comes to technology-assisted review, we are very happy if we achieve 80%, even 75% recall. But I shudder to think of the day when I go to a client to explain that, good news, we've been very successful in our privilege review. We only let 25% of your privileged documents through and produce to the other side. That kind of outcome would simply be unacceptable. And that makes the privilege review process that much harder. So while that's just one difference, while there's probably more alike than not alike, it's a crucial difference, and one that makes the sort of rote application of TAR as we've used it for relevance not exactly on point. We need some new methods, new technologies that address that close to zero risk tolerance that we have around privilege review, and that's a useful partnership between technology and lawyers applying their advanced and subtle legal analysis. So with that, Omar, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks for that incisive analysis, Scott. So now that we have a substantive understanding of the challenges associated with privilege review, it begs the question, how can artificial intelligence help solve those challenges? And so I would like to call upon someone who's an early adopter of AI and indeed has firsthand experience of using Text IQ to identify documents for privilege when it comes to antitrust matters. Jessica Maurer is a partner in Mayer Brown's Chicago office and a member of its litigation and dispute resolution practice. As someone who has counseled clients on antitrust matters, she oversees the collection, review, and submission of documents in response to second requests from the DOJ and the FTC. Thanks for being here with us today, Jessica. You are someone who has been a longtime advocate of AI and made huge strides in normalizing its use in matters related to antitrust. I think it would help if you could give very briefly an overview of exactly what second requests are and why they are challenging. And then more importantly, talk about how you've used Text IQ and artificial intelligence to navigate the challenges associated with privilege review while handling second requests on behalf of your clients.
Thanks, Omar. So I have spent a majority of my career counseling clients on various antitrust and competition-related matters, including responding to second requests and all the unique e-discovery challenges that come along with the second request. And I really think that this is an area where parties are particularly well situated to benefit from AI tools like the ones that Text IQ has developed and is developing. For those of you who are lucky enough to have never experienced a second request, I'll briefly tell you what it is. So under the Hart-Scott-Rodino Antitrust Improvements Act, parties to certain transactions have to file a pre-merger notification with the FTC and DOJ and then wait 30 days until a waiting period expires to close their transaction. If during that time, the investigating agency thinks that they need more time to determine whether or not there's some anti-competitive effect, they'll issue what's commonly referred to as a second request. So these requests are extremely, extremely broad. I like to compare them to basically all of your data and written and document discovery that you would see in a huge litigation, but you get it before the complaint is filed, and then you have to respond to all of it within maybe a month or two. So, think 20 to 30 custodians, maybe even more, document requests that go back multiple years. At the end of the day, you're really collecting, processing, reviewing, producing millions and millions of documents within 1 to 2 months. And the reason for the rush is that obviously, once you substantially comply, the agencies go back on the clock. And assuming there's no timing agreement, they then have 30 days to either sue to block your deal or let you close your deal. And of course, parties don't want to wait 2 years for you to sift through 2-3 million documents before they close their deal. They want to get it. So what does this mean from discovery? It means, first of all, you're not spending 6 months negotiating the scope of the request. You're maybe negotiating it down a little bit, and then you're getting going. And while TAR 1.0 and CAL, as Scott mentioned, have really kind of solved the responsiveness and relevant review in terms of time spent, you're still faced with this massive privilege review and likely a log that's 20,000, 30,000 lines long that you have to finish in a month or two. To kind of add to all of it, the FTC came out last week and said they're no longer going to allow partial privilege logs. So they used to let you submit a privilege log for 5 to 6 custodians. Now they want the privilege log for the whole, for all of them, which basically means your burden's just increasing even more. So what do? Obviously, you can hire 100 contract attorneys to work nonstop for a month and a half, but that's clearly very expensive, especially if you're paying overtime. There are massive quality control issues, as Scott pointed out, and those are particularly problematic in a privilege context where you're potentially dealing with subject matter waiver. And there are just tons of nuances to a privilege review that contract attorneys just miss. They're just bad at it. So this is kind of where Text IQ has really been a game changer for me and my clients when responding to second requests. There's multiple ways that I've been able to use AI and Text IQ in particular to decrease the cost of the privilege review and also, in my opinion, end up with a much higher quality result at the end of the day. So the first instance, and I think probably the most obvious, is using Text IQ's AI tools to conduct the privilege review itself. So as you heard earlier, Text IQ can analyze who communicates with who and how people communicate to identify privileged documents that contract attorneys are just likely to miss. So the email that doesn't have attorneys in the to or from field. But they're also able to deal with the over-inclusiveness problem that comes with the privileged search terms. So like privileged and confidential. Maybe it's showing up in 200,000 documents in an email footer, and it would take hundreds of hours for contract attorneys to look at every single one of those documents. Using AI, we can quickly figure out that these documents are not privileged, and maybe we do some brief QC over them, but then we can put them aside and move forward with the productions and the privilege review. Obviously there's still attorney input. There's still there's still space for lawyers here. We're not just hitting a button and walking away. But I really think that there is value in cost and time saving in using AI to do a first level privilege review. Another way that I've had clients use AI and Text IQ is for quality control issues. So maybe you still want to lay eyes on every document. That makes sense. But my clients want a sophisticated way to deal with quality control issues that come with contract attorney review without paying Mayor Brown rates to basically double check every single thing they're doing. And so we've been able to use Text IQ's analysis to compare the work of contract attorneys and Text IQ's work to identify a very small set of documents that require second level review by outside counsel. Obviously, this deals with the money issue, not so much the time issue, but it's still helpful to clients. And I think really the last thing that I want to touch on, and really the coolest thing and kind of the wave of the future here, is the ability to just draft a first level privilege log as opposed to having humans type out privilege entries for every single privilege document. In full disclosure, I'm still waiting for an opportunity to do this on one of my cases, but I have Mayor Brown colleagues who have worked with your team in this process. And this is really where I think we're going to see the most significant time and cost savings for using technology, and probably, in my opinion, we will end up with a better product at the end of the day. This is really where I see technology going, and what makes me excited to work in this space. Back to you, Omar.
Thank you so much, Jessica. It sounds like second requests really are the perfect storm of short turnaround times, high volumes of data, and a lot on the line. So it's really fascinating to hear how it's not just a time-saving or cost-saving tool, but actually can improve the quality of the whole process. I now want to traverse into the other primary use case that Text IQ addresses, which is data breach response. Data breaches, as we all know from the SolarWinds recent events and over the last few months, they're becoming more and more frequent. And since 80% of enterprise data is unstructured, attackers actually have a pretty wide surface area that they can target. So with that, I'd like to call on someone who plays an instrumental role at one law firm that's quickly becoming the go-to firm for companies dealing with data breaches. Catherine Lowry serves as co-chair of the Emerging Tech Practice Group and leads Baker Hostetler's innovative legal consulting and R&D team called Incubaker, which has acquired a foremost reputation for helping clients navigate the intersection of digital business, emerging technology, and the law. Thank you for being with us here today, Catherine. As the head of Baker Hostetler's innovation team, you are someone who has a unique vantage point of the intersection of technology, privacy, data security, and the law. I think it would be great if you could explain the problem of exactly why data breaches have become so acute and how Baker Hostetler is building a technology and AI-forward data breach response strategy.
Thanks, Omar. Happy to be here today. Yeah, just read the headlines. No doubt you're going to see globally we're facing these large data breaches and cybersecurity attacks more than ever. One notable one is the Blackbaud ransomware attack in 2020. It was a cloud technology company that was compromised, impacting hundreds of organizations, targeting even their most critical and sensitive unstructured data. At Baker Hostetler, we have a great team, a digital risk and cybersecurity team filled with attorneys that have unrivaled experience in helping organizations become compromise ready and respond effectively to these incidents. So much so that we have a 24/7 hotline. They have helped manage over 8,000 potential incidents, and in 2020 alone have managed over 1,200 incidents. The volume's increasing, and no doubt there's some problems in order to be able to turn around our work and help our clients. Most notably, inside of each incident, there are 4 major phases. I'm going to talk about the last phase, which is the notification phase, where we have to compile a final list of individuals and those that have potential data that's been compromised. In some of these incidents, it could be upwards to millions in our largest cases. And what we are faced with as a law firm is helping clients manage, once we know what data has been compromised, we're talking about gigabytes, even upwards to terabytes of data, largely unstructured. And we have very tight timelines in the realm of 60 days to turn around these notification lists, according to state statutes. And historically, we've really tackled that with keyword searching and manual review. And as you can imagine, that is very costly for our clients. So we're incentivized to figure out ways to support this effort, not only for our attorneys, but our clients. And that's really where Incubator has played a key role. Our consulting and R&D team takes tackling these problems very seriously. Our heavy emphasis is on testing and examining technology, almost lifting the hood, if you will. And we call these black box studies. We had the privilege of working with TextIQ over the past year to test accuracy and identification of their algorithms to detect PII, or personal identifiable information. That could be anything from social security numbers, username and passwords, to date of births, or financial account information. And, that's tough because this is a moving target right now. State statutes are expanding the definition of personal information. They're shortening the timeline. So we need really to leverage technology like never before. And last but not least, this has to fit into our end-to-end process. So to be able to detect the information, depict the characters in the book, and associate it with the key information like PII, but we have to be able to extract that and get that into a process that can move our legal process forward. Really, it's been a privilege working with you and your team, highly supportive team. I can sit here and say today that we have been able to report successful measuring of accuracy and the ability to identify PII faster than manual review, help us alleviate time and reduce that overall friction inside of this process. This summer, hearing about Relativity and TextIQ really was a game changer for us. We think that's really going to help us rewrite our incident response process and, again, to the ultimate benefit, supporting our clients. In closing, I'll say from an Incubator standpoint, solving complex problems, they're tough, right? It takes time, energy, creativity, and I always say a little dose of grit. I'm really thankful for the Incubator team that has been along this journey, and your very supportive TextIQ team in rising to helping us solve this incident response challenge. And just know that this sets the bar very high for us in future endeavors. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Catherine. That was great. So as you heard from the three law firm representatives that we just had today, conventionally there's been a view that privilege, PII, data breach, these are all areas where it's just too risky to try something like AI. I think we've heard just now that in many ways it might be riskier not to use AI, particularly when you have a really short turnaround time or a lot of pressure to really make sure you maintain a high level of consistency and quality. So that was great. Thank you so much, everyone. With that, I'd like to turn to a little bit about TextIQ and Relativity. As Catherine just mentioned, it was really welcome news from a lot of our customers because TextIQ has been working on these problems for several years, and we finally came to a point where, from an accuracy standpoint, our AI actually was able to solve these problems in a way that's been unique and disruptive for those who've had the opportunity to use our technology. But in practice, what the market really demanded was a seamless connective tissue between Relativity, the world's preeminent platform for unstructured data review, and the AI solutions that we had developed for some of these unstructured data problems. So we're incredibly excited to have joined forces with Relativity to help organizations take control of their unstructured data at an unprecedented scale. So with that, I wanted to give just a brief glimpse, and this is kind of a preview into what TextIQ might look like inside of Relativity 1. So here you can see PrivIQ, our privilege product, inside of Relativity 1, and this really gives an overview of what the overall process will look like. We're working around the clock to really make this experience completely seamless and really excited about how it's coming along. I'll also just go into a specific email where you can see, again, within the entire REL workflow, what it looks like if an email is marked as potentially privileged, along with the reasons why, which we found to be critical with privilege review. It's not really just about making a prediction, is it privileged or non-privileged, but actually why did the machine come to that prediction, so that an attorney can actually make a decision themselves about whether or not it is in fact privileged and have a head start in the privilege log. And finally, I want to show our data breach product. Here you can see the global view where this is a really hard problem, being able to actually assess the volume of personal information, the various data elements tied to individuals and regions, among other capabilities. And on an individual email level, you're able to see kind of a preview here of how on an individual email basis, we're actually able to flag whether a document or an email contains PII and also who it's linked to. And as a final note, I would be remiss if I didn't mention a pilot project that we've undertaken, which makes me incredibly excited about the future of artificial intelligence at Relativity. As many of you probably know, there's been a lot of discussion over the last few years that AI is only as biased as the people who develop it. And this is a serious issue. For instance, AI algorithms used in facial recognition, credit decisioning, loan processing, and recruitment, just to name a few applications, have been empirically proven to discriminate against women and people of color. Left unchecked, AI applications can perpetuate biases at scale and further entrench societal inequities and injustices. This issue is of particular importance to us, given that we are a very diverse company that's very passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion. We didn't want to just pay lip service to this idea of ethical AI. We actually wanted to try using our technology for good and setting a precedent for ethical AI. And so we recently completed a pilot project which uses our AI-powered software to help organizations identify instances of unconscious bias in performance reviews. There are a number of studies showing how biases attached to ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, age, and other factors unfairly affect performance reviews and lead to unjust outcomes in the workplace. I guess at some point, we've all seen these biases play out in some form or another. And that's perhaps why this pilot project struck a chord. There's a great deal of media coverage over it. You can read about it on Axios, Fortune, and Forbes, among other publications. Both TextIQ and Relativity are committed to advancing the ethical use of AI. But if you want to learn more about it, you can email us at aiforgood@relativity.com. On behalf of Apoorv and I, we want to thank you for joining us today. Don't forget to take the session survey, and please enjoy the rest of Relativity Fest.
I must admit, I can't explain any of these thoughts racing through my brain. It's true. Baby,